The top box office films of the entire decade of the 1960s in the United States. This was the decade of the long film. Only 3 of these come in under 2 hours, so it took me quite a while to get this video ready. Now, it's always neat to see the juxtaposition between the films you think of as representative of the decade and the ones that were actually the most popular at the time. When it came to getting most butts in those seats, films that were good for the whole family were understandably big, and epic spectacle pictures also ruled. There were, however, a couple of outliers, but enough introduction, let's get to the decade. 1960. The Swiss Family Robinson. Directed by Ken Anakin. Starring John Mills and Dorothy McGuire. Based on the 1812 novel by Johann David Weiss, which, wow, I thought this was a Robert Louis Stevenson. Clocking in at 2 hours and 6 minutes, this is the tale of a family, mother, father, 3 sons, becoming shipwrecked on a jungle island and working together to not only survive, but thrive until they find their way home again. The performances are engaging, and the locations gorgeous. This was filmed on the island of Tobago, and the famed treehouse, which is one of my all-time favorite attractions at Disney World, is truly the treehouse of my dreams. The inclusion of menacing pirates, the leader being portrayed by, how do you pronounce his name? Sisue Hayakawa? Some Asian representation in the pirates, although a mix, and some portrayed by white people, which is par for the course at this time. And honestly, out of the extremely limited range of roles available to Asian people at the time, pirates is not the worst. You've got a cool outfit if nothing else. Now there's some plot convenience which allows for a love interest to be introduced for the older lad, which is after the parents allow the 2 elder boys to sail off and explore in order to basically keep their hormones occupied, which honestly I was wondering about this too. The youngest boy is more of a liability as he spends his time subjugating wild animals into beasts of burden and frequently getting into dangerous situations as a result. But the movie is, again, of its time, and this is treated as a positive attribute. The 2 older boys are not a great deal smarter than the younger, as when Janet Monroe, who is disguised as a 14-year-old boy, arrives on the scene, they don't cotton on that she is a she, and it is not that hard to figure out. Seems the dad got all the male brains in this family. So we spend quite an extended time with the boys and the new lady Roberta as they make their way back across the island, interfering with the ways of nature as they go along. Hey, scavengers gotta eat too. And you fight off an anaconda just because you happen to walk into its home uninvited. Rude. Besides, that anaconda doesn't even want any unless you got buns, hun. Honestly, even once home, the older 2 start fighting with each other over Roberta. Like, how is this productive? Anyway, the family prepares for the pirates coming after them as they determine the pirates wouldn't want to lose Roberta as their hostage. Which, wouldn't the pirates have bigger fish to fry, better things to do? So many questions. But hey, there's an organ, a literal organ, and a water wheel, and that is pretty cool. 1961. 101 Dalmatians. Directed by Clyde Geronimi, Hamilton Lusk, Wolfgang Reitherman. Voices feature Betty Lou Gerson, Rod Taylor, and Kate Bauer. This clocks in at 1 hour and 19 minutes, the shortest runtime out of any of these films by far. This was one of the early films for Disney with their newer look, which I call the messy look. Like, the animation lines are a bit thicker, less smooth, there are bits and pieces around that makes the whole thing look less clean. I believe it was also around this time that they were beginning to reuse animation clips from other films to save money. This film was not designed as a major release, and there is no epic feel. The book is more detailed, and I feel better. Hey, remind me to do a comparison video on these at some point. But overall, the movie is quite charming. Betty Lou Gerson as Cruella chews the scenery and steals the film. But the pups are also adorable, and there are some heartstrings being pulled as Pongo and Perdita do everything in their power to retrieve, dogs, their babies, like any parents would, and especially also when their human Roger works to revive one of the babies when it is born not breathing. There isn't much particular depth to the story other than that. It's fairly straightforward, and the animation isn't especially innovative, but it's more than suitable for a family rewatch, and the music is catchy, even if I can't realistically see the tune Cruella de Vil being on the hit parade, but a nice time was had by all. 1962. The Longest Day. This was also directed by Ken Anakin. That guy got around. Also Andrew Martin and Bernhard Wicki. Stars John Wayne and Robert Mitchum. Although starring is a wide term here, despite the swath of names in this film: Richard Burton, Henry Fonda, Sean Connery, and Peter Lawford, oh my heart, etc., etc. It's really more about the story than about star power, which I feel is as it should be. This film is 2 hours and 58 minutes, more like the longest film, am I right? But wonderfully, it didn't feel like it. This literally is about one single day, the events leading up to and during the Allied invasion of Normandy during World War II. The big scene from the movie that everyone knows is the sweeping, massive overhead shot of one of the beaches. There were multiple beaches, one of many things I didn't know, with the soldiers running up, some getting cut down, the thick of battle with everything that implies, all in one shot. It is really something. But then, there are actually many impressive such shots in this film, and the pacing scoots right along, with a few select characters given their moment to tell a bit of their personal story, not too much, but just enough to give us something to hang on to, the individuals from the crowd representing the US military in a nutshell. Other than the big historical names, we don't know who is going to survive the conflict and who isn't, and it really ramps up the stakes. There's also a nice balance between the action scenes and the still actiony but not pew pew pow pow type of action. The little rooms with the folks who decide. Those from England, France, America, and Germany. The Nazis we see are being frustrated by a mercurial leader on who they can no longer count to lead them with any sort of sensible strategy or, indeed, leadership. Interesting stuff, that. The pacing and excitement keeps up right to the end, even to the post-battle resolution. I really enjoyed this one. It kept my interest and didn't feel like almost 3 hours, even if that hairdo would never have happened in the 1940s, especially in an occupied countryside town where a hairdresser would certainly not have been able to have the necessary supplies. But still, so good, despite my nitpicking, which I could not do much of. 1963. Cleopatra. Directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz and Ruben Mamoulian. Stars Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and Rex Harrison. Easily the longest movie on a list of long movies. When I watched it, it showed as being 4 hours and 20 minutes, but IMDb lists it at 5 hours and 20 minutes, so either I counted wrong or I watched a truncated version, which definitely did not feel like one. The story, of course, is about the titular ruler of Egypt and her alliance with Rome and all the complications that entailed. However, the story behind the making of the film is actually far more fascinating, and that would take far too long to go into here. Suffice to say, this film nearly bankrupted the studio, let alone all of Hollywood, and you can see on screen where all that money went. Not only the big stars, the massive extras and day players, the costumes, but the sumptuous sets, and really sumptuous might be an understatement. Never forget the life-sized barge which sank and they had to build another. When it comes to the movie itself, it's not bad at all and quite engrossing. The performances help, with Harrison Sealer particularly being a ruler who is only too aware of the precariousness of his position. and Roddy McDowall as his successor Octavian brings an almost bug-eyed intensity to his role. Hume Cronin also does not get quite enough screen time as Cleo's tutor-turned-advisor. A particular highlight for me was what I called, back in the day, Martin Landau, a man with finely turned, if inordinately hairy calves, and a tendency to do this move a lot. Overall, the movie is good, but long. It does feel it, although not all the time. Some scenes drag as there is too much dialogue, or too little, or sometimes both at once. This is, however, highly recommended if you have the time and patience to spare. 1964. Mary Poppins. Directed by Robert Stevenson. Starring Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke. Okay, so this one and Dalmatians were the only ones I did not have to rewatch because I've already watched this one, in particular, about 60 billion times, but, we all have our favorites. Based loosely, when you think about it, on the book series by P.L. Travers, and no, I still haven't seen Saving Mr. Banks, which is about the making of this film. I think I have to be in the right mood for it, and I haven't yet. This movie, I say, is about a magical nanny who brings said magic to an English family, helping them all come closer together. It spawned a modern sequel with Emily Blunt, and no, I haven't seen that either. Much has been said over the years regarding poor Dick Van Dyke's non-accent. Come on, people, his voice coach was Irish, for heaven's sake. The man did the best he could with what he was given. But, never forget, he actually played 2 roles in this film, something which went over my head as a child. As a character, Mary Poppins is quite different from the book, but it makes sense to have her more likable for the film, and Andrews essays this admirably while retaining the no-nonsense, as to her own personal definition, qualities that are essential. Another long film. At 2 hours and 19 minutes, you would think that might be too much for a children-friendly movie. But it doesn't feel like it. Excellent songs by the Shermans round it all out. No wonder this has stood the test of time. 1965. The Sound of Music. Directed by Robert Wise. Starring Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer. Another one I had to rewatch because, believe it or not, I haven't seen this since I was a kid. I was struck by how good it was. I mean, okay, everyone says it is, but everyone says that about a lot of things, so I was a bit skeptical. But yeah, this one has also stood the test of time. Andrews again plays a nanny, but this one is based on the real-life story of the Von Trapp family, who rose to fame in their native Austria and had to escape when they were targeted by the Nazis. This one won Best Picture, and is another long one, 2 hours and 54 minutes in total. The songs still hold up, although many of them are repeated throughout the movie, and it seems like they could have written just one more, or at least substituted more incidental music. But the film doesn't drag overall, and the performances are realistic and engaging. I thought it interesting how the Nazis are felt throughout the film, as a presence, but peripherally, until the last third or so when they cannot be ignored. Parallels are interesting. Note of curiosity. The Captain and Maria get married, good for them, but how on earth did they book a huge cathedral and arrange everything for a wedding on such short notice? Anyway, I found another cool note in Richard Haydn as the promoter who encourages the family to come together as a musical act. Haydn was an actor who is well known today, if not by name, for doing the voice of the caterpillar in Alice in Wonderland. This musical is easy to think of as a bit of fluff, but it gets downright suspenseful at the end, particularly when you consider it's being based on true events. Would watch again, although not right away because, come on, it's almost 3 hours. 1966. The Bible. Directed by John Huston. Starring John Huston, Richard Harris, George C. Scott, Ava Gardner, Peter O'Toole, etc., etc. Presumably this was supposed to be a series, as this only covers part of Genesis, I guess. It is also known as The Bible in the Beginning. This one clocks in at 2 hours and 54 minutes, just as long as The Sound of Music, but sadly, as a film, mind you, no religious comments here. As a film, not as engaging. I found it interesting to note that this is rated 13 and up due to sex and violence. It is a valiant attempt, but it's overly long and slow at parts. Note also for animal lovers, if you thought the Swiss Family Robinson was a bit tough to watch, Abraham's slaughtering of different animals for a sacrifice is graphic, and it's also surreal and disturbing. We cover the making of the earth and etc., Adam and Eve, who were apparently blonde, blue-eyed white people, who knew? Cain and Abel, Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, which is a relatively short sequence compared to the rest, Noah, Abraham, Sodom and Gomorrah. There are some downright odd bits, such as making the serpent in the Tree of Knowledge a humanoid at first, only becoming a snake when it hits the ground. When the world is being created at the beginning with the lava spewing and the dramatic horns blaring, I half expected Godzilla to come out of the ocean, which would have changed things. There are also some neatly cinematic moments, arguably the Abraham scene mentioned, and a neat illustration of the begats, the generations through the years. I can see why this was a big hit, as appealing to most any religious community can bring in a decent crowd. The actual storytelling, however, could have been done better. 1967, The Graduate. Directed by Mike Nichols. Starring Dustin Hoffman and Anne Bancroft. One of these shorter films at 1 hour and 46 minutes. Again, hadn't watched this in years. I only saw it in bits and pieces as a kid when my parents were watching it. A very modern film in many ways cinematically. So many striking shots, so it still holds up in that way. And I'd watch it again just for the shots and for Bancroft's performance. Now, it's not that Hoffman is bad, he's very good. But his character being sympathetic just does not hold up. He starts off well enough, the graduate of the title coming home with no particular life plan, and his family's well-meaning attempts to get him off his butt, basically, only pushes him further into his state of ennui. And I can deal with that because who among us hasn't felt lost, uncertain of which direction to take in life, sure. Bancroft, as the older family friend Mrs. Robinson, essays the same ennui from a different stage of life, showing that this feeling might never go away, and leads her to desperate measures, if still relatively safe, not wanting to risk her position with her family, to find some form of excitement. So I get all that. But Hoffman's character just becomes less likable, as he convinces himself he is in love with Bancroft's daughter, and eventually he obsesses over her and even stalks her, breaks up her marriage on the altar, again, how on earth did this wedding get put together so dang quickly, as a form of rebellion. As the daughter Elaine, Catherine Ross goes along with the rebellion in the end, but there's more than enough clue that this may not be what she really wants. The ending at least is brilliant, giving us a glimpse into the fact that said rebellion may in fact just be that and not an actual solution. Now, I knew Simon and Garfunkel contributed to the soundtrack, but did not know that they were the soundtrack, in the same vein as Cat Stevens on Harold and Maude. Highlights for me were William Daniels, Kit, John Adams, Mr. Feeney as Hoffman's father, and his mother. Get this. Okay, first of all, although the mother wasn't a central character, there were very definite parallels to Mrs. Robinson. Not really subtle at all. She looks so much like her, and it's pretty much hitting you over the head with the Oedipus-ness of it all. But it worked. Now, I didn't even realize it until I looked it up, but she was played by Elizabeth Wilson, a woman who had a long and varied career, but who may best be known today for playing the villainous Abigail Craven, aka Dr. Pindor Schloss, in the 1991 Addams Family. Oh, did I do a little dance on learning that? Yes, a dance! I do those kinds of things. I would recommend this one for film fans. 1968, Funny Girl. Directed by William Wyler. Starring Barbara Streisand and Omar Sharif. 2 hours and 31 minutes this one, and an Oscar performance from Streisand, well deserved indeed. A musical about the life of Ziegfeld star Fanny Brice. Let me back up here. Too many people nowadays don't know about Florenz Ziegfeld, a showrunner who brought many a spectacle to Broadway at the beginning of the last century, a legend in his time. The shows had no particular plot but were a mix of the best, in Ziegfeld's estimation anyway, musical and variety acts at the time. To be picked for a Ziegfeld show meant you had hit the biggest of the big time. What the shows became best known for, however, were the pageant-like tableaus of gorgeous ladies dressed in impossible, and often quite scanty, costumes, posed or moving minimally, the idea for the audience being to just look and admire. Now that is covered in this movie, although again, the look overall is far too 60s to be accurate. However, Bryce, the funny girl of the title, was not conventionally beautiful. In now classic Streisand style, she spends much of the movie declaring how non-beautiful this luminous lady in fact is, but Bryce was a particularly gifted comedian, and became a star both on stage and later in radio with the popular program Baby Snooks. I can think of no one better than Streisand to play her, she even looks the part. Omar Sharif also does well as her lover-turned-husband, who genuinely does love her, but can't reconcile her fame with his failed attempts at business. His business being gambling. Perhaps he could have tried something else? This was another one that filled its time quota admirably, and the songs are enjoyable, although it helps if you're a Streisand fan, as her style is individual. Also, I was delighted to see classic Hollywood character actor Frank Phelan crop up as a theater manager, and Mae Questel, the original voice of the cartoon character Betty Boop, along with a ton of other voice work, and also she was Aunt Bethany in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. I recommend this one if you like musicals and have the patience, or fandom, for Streisand. Last up, 1969. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Directed by George Roy Hill. Starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford. 1 hour and 50 minutes. 50. So again, one of the shorter offerings, although it's really not a short movie at all, but that's this decade for you apparently. George Roy Hill, of course, also directed The Sting and Slapshot, so he and Newman made quite the team. This is based on true facts, the best kind, about the Hole in the Wall gang, which I hadn't known was a real thing, so cool, learning. Cassidy and Kid, being young fellows with not much else to do, turn to crime. Funny how often that works out. They crime around Wyoming and run afoul of the law. Who could have guessed that would happen? So they scoot off to Bolivia, hoping to find a turn of luck. Nothing doing sadly, so they end up continuing their run of nefarious doings until their luck runs out at last. Catherine Ross is also in this one as Newman's Gail Friday, who nips out before things go too sour. This wasn't a hit at the time with the reviewers like it was with audiences, but it grew in estimation over the years until it's achieved positive cult status today. This was my first time watching, and I hate to be a disappointment to you all again, I'm sure I am, but this just didn't hit me like I thought it would. Maybe my expectations were too high, or maybe I was just expecting something different, I don't know. Especially with Redford's passing, I really wanted to like it, but I just didn't. There was some good banter, and Newman and Redford made an excellent pairing, which I already knew from watching The Sting, but overall I just wasn't particularly engrossed by this film, and although it was one of the shorter ones, it seemed longer. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be disappointed, but it's going to happen sometimes, and you can't like everything, and still I am so sorry, world and fellow film fans. I will hand in my cinema file card at the next meeting, which we will have, totally. So this was quite a decade. Lots of the movies we associate with the 60s today were not tops with audiences at the time, but that just seems to be often the case. Family movies and great epics were the most in vogue, with more indie outliers like The Graduate and Butch and Sundance starting to worm their way in. Not everything has stood the test of time, but others have held up surprisingly well. Do go on and watch any one of these, even mine too. I'll put in the description where to currently find them streaming, if possible. And please, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Lots of strength to you in the coming week. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.